guys following the presidential race? Any results? What's that? Don't even get it. Okay. So I've got your homework returned, and I'm going to take a few questions as I usually do on the homework that you have for me today. It should be part writing homework, so I don't know, I labeled it B, I think, yeah, part writing homework B. And this was to focus on, at least on the top, it was to focus on correct part writing two chords whose roots are a third or a sixth apart. We talked about how last class there was one guideline to do that correctly to avoid all kinds of part writing errors, and that was to keep the two tones that are in common between the two chords static or stationary, and move the remaining upper voice by step. And then down below there was a short progression that included some root movement by third, but also some root movement by fourth and or fifth. So I am planning to collect this handout as well today to keep checking your early stages of your part writing. Does anyone have some questions on either the top or the bottom section? Okay,
On the third one in the first section.
The third one in the first section. So is it a matter of finding the error, or is it a matter of just doing it all correctly?
By finding the error.
Okay, this is perhaps maybe not one of our typical or standard errors, but the third one in the first section is in the key of D major, and it has, let's see, I'll put the key signature in quickly, two sharps. And the 4 chord, the second of the 2 chords given there, should be spelled GBD with the G double. But if you look at the chords closely, there's something wrong with the spelling of the 4 chord. Can anyone find something that's a little goofy about that? It should be GBD. Yeah. There's an F sharp, yeah. There's an F sharp in there. So you can either circle that one and say wrong note, or you could circle that and you could say the root of the chord is not doubled. Either way, you could say wrong note, or there's a doubling error because the G is not doubled. I think I would accept either label or either explanation for that error there. So the 6th chord that comes before it, D, F sharp, B, is voiced like this. Yeah, B, D, F sharp, B. So in order to part write this measure correctly, that is, go from the 6th chord to the 4 chord properly without any errors, I would strongly encourage that you use the guideline we talked about last class, which is to keep the 2 tones that are common between the chords static. I know that this chord is a B, D, F sharp. This chord should be a G, B, D. So it sounds to me, it looks to me like the 2 common tones are a B and a D. So I'm going to just keep them static right here. And move the remaining voice by step. And I should not have any errors then if I correct it that way. So that takes care of that problem. Did you have the similar question, or was it a different? Same thing. Okay. Good. Other questions? Perhaps somewhere on this assignment before I collect it. Yes?
On the bottom, is the first one?
The first one, so going from the minor 1 to the major 5 chord?
Yeah.
Okay. Take a look at that. So here we are in G minor. The first chord is given to us. G flat. And we're supposed to take it to a 5 chord, whose root is D. And I notice that the roots are a 4th apart. So that's why there is a blank up above the staff between these 2 chords, because I'm supposed to insert in that blank which guideline I use for roots a 4th or 5th apart. That is guideline 1, 2, or 3. It looks to me like the soprano note of the 2nd chord is given. And let's see here. Just trying to think if it's gonna. Yeah, it looks like really the only sensible guideline to use in this one, because of the soprano's already moving by step, the only sensible guideline to use here is guideline number 1. So I'm going to put a 1 in the blank. And guideline number 1, if you'll recall, for 2 chords whose roots are 4th or 5th apart, says that you find the 1 common tone between the chords, and you keep it static or stationary. And the tone in common between a G, B flat, D and a D, F, A chord is a D. So I'm going to keep that static. And then the remaining 2 upper voices move by step in the same direction. So if the soprano moved down by step, then so will the alto. And I have 2 roots, which I should have, double the root, D, F, and A. Now, I am 95% of the way done with this chord, but I'm not 100% of the way done. Is there something that I'm missing on the 5 chord?
It has to be F sharp.
Let's see, yes. Yes, I need to put a sharp on my F in this chord. Why? Because it's a 5 major 5 chord in a minor key. And whenever I have a major 5 chord in a minor key, I find the note of that chord that serves as, or that is scale degree 7 of the key. You see in a DFA chord, F is scale degree 7 in its G scale. So then I raise that a half step always with an accidental. That's always true of every 5 chord in minor keys. It's also true of 7 chords in minor keys as well, but we don't see 7 chords quite as frequently as we do 5. So that's how I would part write the first 2 chords in the example on the bottom. And I would make sure that you've got that F sharp there. Let's see if I had any other comments besides reminding you about that F sharp. I think that was all that I had. I might have time for one more question before we go on. Okay. Very well. Make sure your name is on it as usual, and I'll come around and collect it and look at these, try to get it back to you by Friday. Thank you. If you can get it to me later today, that'll be fine. It'll be just fine. Thank you. You got one over there? No? So today, what we're going to discuss is really the last pair of root relationships that root position chords can be in that we haven't talked about yet. And that is, we're going to talk about how to part write between 2 root position chords whose roots are a 2nd or a 7th apart. A 2nd or a 7th apart. And because very rarely, although it happens, but very rarely are chord roots a 7th apart. That's a pretty steep leap, even for basses. But since they're very rarely that far apart, all of my examples today are going to be involving roots that are a 2nd apart, but the part writing rule guideline is the same for both when roots are a second or a seventh apart. A second or a seventh apart. And this is actually going to complete our, I guess, our learning of how to part write any chords that are in root position. So we're kind of reaching a small milestone here. The first thing you need to know about two chords whose roots are a second or a seventh apart is that those chords will have 0 pitches in common. Two chords whose roots are second or seventh apart have no pitches in common. They share none of the same tones. No pitches in common. Okay. Just put here no common pitches at this root relationship or interval. Okay. So, if there are no common pitches between two chords at this interval, where the roots are that interval apart, what that means is that every single voice part, all 4, soprano, alto, tenor, and bass, all 4 of those parts will have to move somewhere to go from one chord to the next. Makes sense, right? If there's no common tones between the two chords, I can't keep any of the voices static or stationary. They all have to move to a different pitch to get to the next chord. Okay. Now, there is one primary or main guideline to follow when you part write chords whose roots are second or seventh apart, and I'm going to tell you that guideline right now. And the one way that I remember this guideline is just remember that all 3 of the top voices move in contrary motion to the bass. Contrary motion to the bass. So, as an example over on the far left of the board, you see how I have 2 chords whose roots are a second apart or a step apart. A 4 chord in C major going to a 5 chord. It's a silly question, but I'm going to ask you anyways. What direction is the bass moving? Is it moving up or down? It's moving up. So, because the roots are a second apart and the bass is moving up, guess which direction all 3 upper voices are going to move? Yeah, they're going to move down to the nearest chord tone. Contrary motion, we recall, is right the opposite direction that another voice is moving. So if the bass is moving up, all 3 of the upper voices are going to go in contrary motion or go down in this case to the nearest chord tone. Okay, so let's remember that, down to the nearest chord tone. In the key of C major, a 5 chord involves the pitches G, B, D. I hope you're getting pretty adept at figuring that out. And if you need to write it down on your paper, that's totally fine. Okay, G, B, D. I know that I need to have 2 G's in my chord, right? Because the G is the root. So, and I've told myself, and try not to let yourself slip, I've told myself that all the voices have to come down. So, the soprano is on an A. What is the closest chord tone, G, B, or D, below an A for the soprano to move to? G, yeah. Ask the same question for the alto pitch. The alto is on an F. What is the closest chord tone below the F, G, B, or D, for it to move to? D. And finally, the same thing is true for the tenor. The tenor is on middle C. What is the closest chord tone, G, B, or D, that is found below a C? A B, right? B is in bold. And look at that. You end up with all the notes you need, G, B, D, and you have the root tone. So, as a reminder, because the bass is going up and the roots are a step or a second apart, all 3 of the upper voices move in contrary motion to the bass, the opposite direction. Really, when you think about it, that's not that hard or complicated, is it? You just got to remember, okay, you have to first of all be very aware of what interval your roots are at, how far apart they are. And then use the proper guideline. In this case, you just move them in contrary motion to the base, because the roots are a second apart. Any questions about that so far? Okay, let's do one more example in the next measure. Notice that I'm going still in C major. I'm moving from a 6 chord to a 5 chord. That is an A minor triad to a G major triad. Take a look at the root relationship. Both chords are, of course, in root position because we're only working with root position chords. Notice that the roots are a second apart. In fact, in this case, the bass is moving down by a second rather than up like it did over here. So if the bass is moving down by a second, and I'll put the notes of the 5 chord that we need again, what direction will all 3 upper voices, that is the tenor, alto, and soprano, what direction should they move? Up. That's right, the opposite direction. And remember, they're going to go up to the nearest chord tone. G, B, D, we need the G double for our final answer. Okay. So what is the nearest chord tone, G, B, or D, above the tenor? Wouldn't it be the D, right? Because we can't go down, we've got to go up. And D is of this, it belongs in this chord, and that's the closest one to the C. Okay. How about the alto is on an E? Which one, G, B, or D, is closest to it, knowing that it has to go up? A G. Is it okay that the alto leaps from E to G? Yeah, that's just a small leap of a third. No sweat, no problem. And finally, the soprano has to go up. What is the nearest chord tone, G, B, or D, above an A? The answer should be B, right? So it turns out that we finish up with what we exactly need. We have a G, a B, and a D. And the G, the root of the chord, is duplicated. I have 2 Gs. So really, you just have to remember, at least for now, just remember when the roots are a second or a seventh apart, move the top 3 voices in contrary motion to the bass, the opposite direction. Guess what happens if you do not remember and you do not move all 3 top voices in the opposite direction of the bass? Yeah, a lot of errors result, especially parallel fifths and parallel octaves. They will abound and they will multiply so fast on you that you won't even know what hit you. I mean, if you move the top 3 voices in the same direction or in similar motion to the bass, when the bass or when the notes are a second apart, yeah, you're going to have parallel fifths and parallel octaves almost immediately. It's just, it's kind of, I mean, I don't want to, it's not like the end of the world or scary, but it's kind of dangerous to do that. Please don't do it. Don't try that at home. Yeah.
Sorry, I might have this confused, but just for clarification.
Sure.
Didn't you say when you're on a major 5 chord and the T pitch is on the outer voice,
Yep.
that you have to sharpen it? So would you have to sharpen the B?
Only when the 5 chord is in a minor key.
Oh.
Yeah, and actually I'm happen to be in C major here. But you're really close. You would raise it, yeah, if I was in minor. And then where would this note, since it's in an outer voice, where would it have to go if there was another chord it was going to?
The do.
Yeah, it'd have to go up a half step to C, absolutely. It would have to. Good. So I hope that clarifies. Now, I would like, oh, do you have a question?
It's just general, like, does it matter, like, it goes from like 4 to 5. Is it still the same if we went from 5 to 4? Still a second?
Yeah, it's still a second, but in that case, your bass would probably be going down, so your top 3 voices would go up. Now, I wish that this was the end of the lesson for today. I really do. I mean, I wish it was that easy. I wish it was the end of the lecture and I could say, yeah, go have lunch. whatever you want to do. But there's one pair of chords whose roots are a second apart that creates part writing problems when we follow this guideline. So I need to go through an exception to this guideline. There's just one exception, but it's an important one. In fact, I can come back to that example later. I'm going to make some spacing here. Let's start with this two-chord pair. Notice if I take if I start with a 5 chord, or I'm on a 5 chord, and I move to a 6 chord, notice that the bass, the roots are a second apart. Just what we've been talking about. And if I were to voice, let's say the 5 chord this way, where I have a D here, and I have a G here and a B here, because right, it's GBD, that's the 5 chord. And if I were to follow the guideline we just talked about, that is taking the top 3 voices in contrary motion to the bass. See, the bass is going up. That means I would naturally be thinking, well, I've got to take all 3 voices down to the nearest chord tone. And by the way, a 6 chord in C major consists of the notes A, C, and B. We need the A double tone. So let's just follow the guideline, and the nearest chord tone below the tenor's D that would fit in this chord is a C. The nearest chord tone below a G that fits in the chord I'm trying to get to is an E. And the nearest chord tone below a B that fits in the chord is an A. And you might think, I don't know, Dr. Hawkinson, it looks pretty good to me. I've got all the notes I need in the 6th chord, and I've got the root double. So what is the problem? You know?
The leading tone as a result.
Yeah, you see how this chord, the 5 chord, has the leading tone of the key. Scale degree 7 of this key is B. Do you see how it's in an outer voice? Isn't that one of the rules on your yellow sheet? I think it's rule 3. When the leading tone of the key is in an outer voice, it has to move up by half step when it goes to the next chord. Is the leading tone moving up by half step as it's going to the next chord here? No, it's not. So we kind of have a conflict of a rule and a guideline. We have a problem. We have an issue here. So one of these has to give. There has to be an exception either to the rule, the rule on the yellow sheet, or there has to be an exception to this contrary motion to the bass thing for this particular progression. And by the way, the exception is only for when 5 goes to 6. That's the only one that requires the exception. Any other chords whose roots are a second apart, don't even bother with this. Just do contrary motion to the bass. It's only when 5 goes to 6. Yes?
Doesn't matter if it's minor or major 6th?
It will a little bit. I'm gonna do a minor in a minor key in the next measure. Okay? But basically, since we have a rule that says this has to go up and a guideline that says this is supposed to go down, what we have to do is to say, okay, we're going to let the hard rule stand from your yellow sheet. We're going to make an exception to the guideline. Okay? In order to follow the rule, then, I have to take this pitch up. And that is actually how a 5 chord going to a 6 chord is part written correctly. What ends up happening is because we have to take the leading tone of the key up, it results in some kind of strange doubling in this chord. Right? Aren't I normally supposed to double the root, the A? But I don't have two A's in this chord. I actually have two C's now in the chord. So basically, what results is that when 5 chord goes to a 6 chord, or you could say it this way, when a 6 chord comes right after a 5 chord, we fudge on the doubling rule of the 6 chord, and we say that the bass or the root does not have to be doubled in the 6 chord. In fact, in order to allow all the rules to stand, we're going to fudge on the doubling and say that the third of the 6 chord must be doubled. I probably shouldn't have erased the notes, but again, it's A, C, E. So do you see how A is the root, and we would normally double that pitch. C is the third of the chord. We end up having to double the third of this triad here in order to let the hard rules on your yellow sheet stand. And this is true whenever a 6 chord comes after a 5. Or whenever 5 goes to 6. What you do is you find the leading tone in your 5 chord, whatever voice it's in, and you take it up. And then you'll end up with 2/3 in your 6 chord, 1 root and 1/5.
How do you deal with like going after that note, like with the messed up 6?
Yeah, that's a little bit trickier. We won't have to really deal with that until, I don't even know if we deal with that at all the rest of the semester. We'll probably get to it, well, we might. I can't remember, but we'll get to, when we start talking about how to part write chords in inversion, we'll start talking about a slightly different method that you can use to part write, and that'll take care of the messed up 6 when you get there. For now, you're not going to have to do a chord after the messed up 6, so to speak. It is a little messed up just because of the strange doubling, but it certainly sounds satisfying to have that leading tone resolved. Yeah, I was gonna play that on the piano for you. Okay, so we're in C major, and I've got the 5 chord voice like this. Oh, I'm sorry, where's my bass? There it is. Sorry, I can't see it from here. Anyways, if I did it normally, it would resolve like this. That's just so poor. But if I do this, now at least I have the leading tone resolved up at the top there. And by the way, I don't know if you've caught on yet, but usually after a 5 chord, we expect to hear a 1 chord. That's what's usual. When we get something other than a 1 chord coming after a 5, like I have here, the 6 comes after the 5, we don't expect something other than a 1 to sound right here. And so since we don't expect it, but we get it anyways, this particular 2-chord progression, 5 to 6, is known as something called the deceptive progression. Or deceptive movement, deceptive motion. It's called deceptive because our normal expectations, we expect a 1 chord here, that expectation is thwarted. But sometimes it's pleasantly thwarted. We don't get 1, but we get this, we get this nice sounding minor 6. I wasn't expecting that, but yet it happened anyway. And so it's called the deceptive progression, or deceptive motion, 5 to 6. And again, the part writing is just a little bit strange. Because we have to double the third in the 6th chord when the 6 comes after, right after 5. Another way to look at the part writing of this, if you want, you see how normally the guideline would say if the bass goes up, the top 3 voices come down. You see how 2 of the upper voices still do move in contrary motion to the bass? It's just the one voice that contains the leading tone, scale degree 7 of the key, that has to go against that guideline. So in other words, in total, you could say 2 voices will go up, 2 voices will come down. It won't always, they won't always be in the same order, but it'll always be two going up, two going down. Yes?
Is this only a problem when the leading tone's in the soprano?
It is in major keys, yes. In minor keys though, even when the leading tone is in an inner voice, it poses a problem, and that's what I'm gonna show next. Did I say last class, did I say the leading tone was kind of a high maintenance pitch? Sorry, I don't make this up, this is all, this is all designed hundreds and hundreds of years before any of us were here. Okay, so I'm gonna go to C minor now, in this next measure, and I'm going to even put in the key signature, B flat, E flat, A flat, E flat, E flat, A flat. And this time I'm going to go, let's see, where am I? Right here. Yeah, I'm gonna go from 5 to 6 again. What kind of Roman numeral 6 though do I get in minor keys? I should get capital 6. Because the 6th chord in minor keys is major. It's a major triad. Now, I'm going to revoice the 5 chord a little bit. It's still going to be GBD, but I'm going to take the leading tone, the B, out of an outer voice. I'm going to tuck it away in an inner voice. By the way, in a minor key, what should I be putting on my B to make the chord still? A natural. It's a 5 chord in a minor. I have to raise the leading tone. So if I don't want B flat from the key signature, I need to raise it a half step so that it's B natural. Okay. But do you see how B natural is still, it's the leading tone. It's scale degree 7 in C minor. So my root movement is by second. I'm going up by step here. Normally, the guideline that we learned, 10 minutes ago or whatever it was, would say, move all 3 upper voices in contrary motion to the bass. Move it down. And you might think, well, can't I do that? Because isn't the rule like, if the leading tone of the key, what I call T, if that's in an inner voice, can't it go down? Doesn't it have the option to? The answer is yes, that's the way we normally learned it. But if I do that, let's take all these top 3 voices in contrary motion to the bass and see what we get. And you might say, I don't know, Dr. Robinson, I don't see a problem with that. Why can't I part write it like that? I'm obeying the guideline. All 3 top voices moving in contrary motion to the bass. I've got the bass, the root, that is of the chord, the A flat, I've got it doubled. And the leading tone is in an inner voice, so don't I have the choice to move it down? And normally I would say yes. But there is one rule on your yellow sheet we have not talked about yet, and that is rule number 9. Rule number 9 says, melodic augmented intervals when you part right from one chord to the next must be avoided. Melodic augmented intervals must be avoided. What incarnation does that mean? Well, it means when you take a note in a chord, and if you move it to another note in the next chord, and that interval that it moved by is an augmented interval, that's not good. That's not good at all. You know what? And the reason is because augmented intervals, melodic augmented intervals going from one chord to the next, that's hard to sing. Very hard to sing a melodic augmented interval. Like C up to D sharp. Maybe if it was notated as C, D flat, it would be easier, but C to D sharp is kind of ugh. So, I want you to pay attention here. Notice I'm in C minor. Is this A natural, A flat, A whatever? What is this? It's A flat, according to the key signature, right? What technically is the type of second that we get from going from B natural down to an A flat? Is that an augmented second, technically? It's a half step larger than a whole step. B natural to A natural would be a major second. B natural to A flat is a little bit further away, that's an augmented second. And Rule 9 says we cannot write, however you want to put it in there. You can't write a melodic augmented second in any voice going from one chord to the next. Well, doesn't that just kind of cramp things a little bit? Now what are we going to do? Well, something has to give again. We've got a rule on the yellow sheet that says one thing, we've got a guideline that says another. And so what we're going to do is we're going to let the rule on the yellow sheet stand, and we're going to fudge the guideline. And just like what we did over here in the major key, we're going to do the same thing here, and that is we're going to say don't double the root of a 6 chord when it comes after 5, double the third of this chord instead, and the melodic augmented second will poof, it'll be gone, it won't even be there. Okay? So, I wish I had a marker that was, like twice as thick and twice as big, and was twice as dark. But the rule is double the third of the 6 chord. And again, here we have A flat, since we're in a minor key, C, E flat. I don't want to double the A flat, because when I do, I get this problem in minor keys. So I want to double the C instead. So guess what? The leading tone, even though it's in an inner voice, and it doesn't have to go up, even though that's true, we're going to take it up a half step anyways. And you see now how I have 2 C's, 1 root in A flat, and 1 fifth in E flat. But I have the third doubled. Let me see if I can summarize a little of this for you. It doesn't matter whether you're in a major key or a minor key. If you have the 2 chords in this order, a 5 going immediately to a 6, what you need to remember is you need to double the third of the 6th chord, not the root. Because when you double the third of the 6th chord, when 5 goes to 6, you avoid all these errors that crop up on your yellow sheet. If you do not double the third of the 6th chord, and you end up forgetting, and you double the root of the 6th chord when it comes after a 5 chord, you're going to have some errors from that yellow sheet in your part writing. And I'll find them. I usually do. So, another summary of this is, it doesn't matter where, in what voice the leading tone of the key is. If it's in an outer voice, well, it's supposed to move up. But even if it's in an inner voice, when 5 goes to 6, you want to take it up anyways. Okay? You don't, when 5 goes to 6, no matter what voice the leading tone of the key is in, it always goes up a half step. Yes?
What happens if it's in an inner voice and a major key?
Okay, in an inner voice, in a major key, technically it's not going to create a part writing error, but I'm not going to go there because I think that's too many exceptions and too much information for people to remember. If you happen to do that accidentally in a major key, it's in an inner voice, you take it down, I won't mark anything wrong. But I just like to really focus on, let's try and get used to doing it always this way, so that you never have to wonder, ooh, now I don't remember what I'm supposed to be doing. Yeah, and you know what? Every year I teach this, and it's fine because we're human. Every year, somebody, even on the final exam, some students will end up forgetting this, and they'll end up doubling the root of this chord accidentally, and they'll end up writing part writing errors that I have to take points off for. But it's just funny. It's something unique about this progression, 5 to 6, that because of the rules we have in this style of part writing, that you really need to double the third of the 6th chord always when it comes after a 5 chord. Okay, let me pause here for a few questions, or any questions before I do some more practice or some examples. Yes?
Can you play some of it?
Yeah. Well, I'll have to just see what I can see from the piano. So I think the first one in C major sounded like this. The next one in C minor sounds like this. It goes, yeah, that's how I voiced it. I want to make sure I got that right. Yeah, because we're in C minor tenor there, right? And you're so used to hearing this, right? 5 to 1. But instead, we're hearing this to this. I kind of like the sound. I personally, I like the sound of progression. It thwarts my expectations, but I'm pleasantly surprised.
You play it the wrong way with the A flat.
That's going to sound like, you won't hear much of a difference. But in the tenor has to sing from B natural to A flat. And just visually, you know, especially if you're a sight read, if you're in choir, you kind of know what I mean. How well do you just sight read B natural going down to an A flat? It's not desirable. It's not friendly, it's not nice to the performer. I guess let's put it that way. Augmented seconds. And by the way, augmented fourths I have on the yellow sheet, those are some other, that's another melodic augmented interval that sometimes crops up, but not nearly as frequently as the augmented second does. Yeah. Okay? All right, let's go through a couple more examples, and then I'll be able to get you guys on your way. Here's the marker. Okay, let's use this next measure. Notice I'm in the key of G. Notice my two chords are 3 and 4. Is this a deceptive progression? Say no.
Yeah.
No, it's not a deceptive progression. It's only when 5 goes to 6 that you have to be ultra careful. For this one, the roots are a second apart. Just use the guideline I told you about 20 minutes ago. The notes of a 4 chord in G are C, E, G. The bass is moving up by step. Move all 3 upper voices down to the nearest chord tone in contrary motion to the bass. What's the nearest chord tone below the tenor's B? Looks like it's going to have to be G. The nearest chord tone below the alto's F sharp looks like it's going to be E. And the nearest chord tone below the soprano's D is C. They're all moving in contrary motion or opposite direction than the bass. No partnering problem. So, you know, don't overthink things or don't work something too hard if you don't have to. If you just have regular 2 chords whose roots are a second apart and those chords are not 5 going to 6, just use your easy diagram. That's what I would suggest. Okay. But now, let's do one more of these tougher ones. Let's go to D minor. And I've got 1 flat in the key. And I've got a 5 going to a 6. And I'll voice the 5 chord like this. What do I need on my C in the soprano? Somebody tell me in a minor key. Not quite. It's already C natural.
Oh, sorry.
Raise it up.
Yeah.
C what?
My bad. Sure.
C sharp. That's right. Yep. Because I've got a 5 chord in a minor key, and that's the leading tone. Okay, now let's be very careful here. This is the special deceptive progression. What do I want to, when I end up on this final chord, what do I want to end up doubling? The third. Okay? Now let's quickly write down what notes this chord is. In the key of D minor, this chord is B flat, D, and F. And I want 1 B flat only. I know it's unusual, but that's what I want. I want 1 F, I'm going to want 2 Ds. Where do I have to take this note since it's in an outer voice? Up to a D. There's 1 of my Ds. Hey, look at that. That's what I want. Okay. I need another D and I need an F. Which one do you think is going to go to the D? The alto or the tenor?
The alto?
The alto, yeah. The alto's closer. And then the tenor will go to the F. If you don't like to look at it that way, maybe look at it this way. when all is said and done, 2 voices go up, 2 voices go down. The third of the 6th chord is double. That's what you need to pay attention to, those things. Okay.
What if you switch the tenor go to the D?
Yeah, if I had the tenor go to the D and then I'd have the alto go to the F, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a look at that quickly. First of all, this is not the smoothest leap. It's okay, it's only the leap of a 4th A to D, but that's not the real issue. What I've actually created, maybe without knowing it, is I've created parallel fifths between the bass and the alto. A to E, B flat to F. Bad, bad, bad. Lose mucho points if you do that. So you see how if you don't do it correctly the way we just talked about, you're going to end up with part writing errors, and you're going to end up losing too many points. So 2 voices up, 2 voices down in the deceptive progression, and don't refer to your 6th chord. Yes.
If it's 6/5, you don't have to worry about any of the.
Right. If it's 6 first and then 5 next, don't even worry about it. Just use your standard guideline. Contrary motion. Okay, so I have one more handout for you. It's part writing handout C, and you're going to ask to be, again ask to be find some errors or some errors in these top things that are given to you because they're part written wrong. Please be very careful when you look at this handout. Somewhere on this handout, you're going to find a 5 go to a 6. In fact, you might even find a 5 go to a 6 somewhere more than once on this handout. It's your job to be Sherlock Holmes and find that, and to do the right thing when you find that. Okay? Once you get this, I suppose you can go ahead and leave since we're out of time.